Podcast Network's family of shows. Available every...
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. And we are in the home stretch of the show. This is our fourth segment of the day here on the podcast. And it is the conclusion of our weekly positional rankings for Week 10 of the NFL season with our defense and special teams units. Now, like I said, defenses matter. And I said this at the start of the season. I'm going to continue to say it as the season progresses. Defenses can be the difference makers. And we've seen young, old, experienced, no matter what you call it, defenses either overperform expectations, underperform expectations, most importantly, prove that the defense factor of fantasy football is still alive and well. And these four defenses represent that ethos very well. Very diverse group of defenses this week. Maybe ones who, coming into the season, you were skeptical about, especially from a fantasy perspective. But all four of these defenses have proved to me that they can rise to the occasion, they can falter. But I really considered this week, because it's a very tough week for me to really kind of gauge which defense could shine. But all four of them, I do know, have defensive game plans and identities that I can get behind in certain matchups, and that is why I chose them. So without further ado, let's talk about them a little bit, starting off with perhaps one of the best young defenses in the league. Has had a very impressive performance against my Seattle Seahawks, unfortunately, but week in, week out, this is a unit that continues to improve, and they are going to be scary. And that is the Los Angeles Rams. Going against the Dolphins offense that, is going to be hard and tough to defend because of the return of Tua. But I feel like this team's strength is that it's starting to coalesce from back to front. Guys like rookies Jared Verse and Braden Fisk are starting to become more aggressive in the ways they can generate pressure, and the back end is holding up even more. Yes, I can, as a Seattle fan, blame the fact that perhaps DK Metcalf would have helped the passing game for Seattle, but it was still impressive what the Rams secondary was able to do, holding up in coverage against still very, very impressive and solid Seattle receivers. JSN still had a 180-yard day and could have had 300, but that's just me complaining there. I have to give credit to what the Rams did. And so, going up against another tough team with even tougher receivers to account for. Look for the Rams to be very physical. Look for the Rams to key in on Tua. Look for the Rams to continue their ascension into the league's elite, because this team is really starting to believe here. And this defensive unit was not the one that had all those injuries, but the offense that had a lot of worries week in, week out to start the season. The defense just, wasn't necessarily ready, I think, at the start of the season. And they just got thrown into the waters, and that's why a lot of people were a little skeptical about this team going forward. But at this current juncture in time, they are a really elite defense. And so I will be scared seeing this team in the next couple of weeks, and especially if this is a playoff team at the end of the season. So look for the Rams to be a team that you have to look out for week in, week out from now on. And then the next team I want to talk about is a team that's proven that against elite teams in the past can, put in good defensive shifts. But this is their toughest test yet, and one that they have failed time in, time out. One that has left them ruining the mistakes they made, and one that they've been working towards to try and win season after season. And that is the Buffalo Bills. Going up against, actually, this is not the game I want to talk about, but it's still, in the back of their minds, because I underestimated the Bills' schedule and said that they were hyping them up to play the Chiefs which is actually in 2 weeks' time, but they are playing the Colts. And even in this game, this is one that I feel is pretty pedestrian for the Bills. Against guys who don't necessarily feel like they can hurt them mobily, the Bills are a very elite defense. Tua, was someone who could have been more mobile in that game, but chose to try and beat them with a deep ball, and look what they did. They were able and willing to sit in zone coverage and generate turnovers that way. Against the Colts, same narrative here. And potentially against the Chiefs, to try and confuse Patrick Mahomes in the pocket. But now looking at the Colts, Joe Flacco, yes, he did some great things in the Cleveland offense, but he's still very much reliant as a pocket passer, relying on his pocket passing abilities to pick apart defenses down the field. And if the Bills do somehow generate pressure, which hasn't necessarily been their strong suit this season, and that's another warning sign for this Colts offense that already, feels a little bit barren of big play threats outside of, Alec Pierce, potentially A.D. Mitchell. They have good route runners, don't get me wrong, and Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. But I feel like the Bills have proven when a quarterback isn't necessarily willing to extend plays and creative structure, they can stay home on receivers and force the quarterback to make silly mistakes. And not for nothing, Joe Flacco has had a very similar game in the past couple of years in his resume, that game against the Texans last season, where the Texans did the same thing. And so the Bills have a very similar game plan. They did it for the Dolphins already. Look for them to do it against the Colts and Joe Flacco yet again. And then, the next defense, I'm going to talk about another young defense here. A lot of young defenses really stepping up and finding their groove this season. This one kind of had a little bit of a wake-up call. Not the biggest one against Arizona, but still one that makes me a little bit apprehensive including them on this list, but still nonetheless, it is a matchup I really like them in, and that is the Chicago Bears defense going up against the Patriots. They only had 6 fantasy points against Arizona. They had 2 fumble recoveries, though, and 3 sacks, so there were some positives to take away from that game. But in this matchup, I feel like you can really key in on a rookie quarterback making mistakes. And so that's what I feel like the Bears can do. They're a defense that at any given moment can flip a game on its head entirely. And they did it in certain situations against certain QBs, and they have been willing to do it with a secondary that is playing some of the most ferocious football out of anyone in the National Football League. And so, yes, this feels like an easy pick, but there are deeper storylines here because Drake May still is a dangerous vertical passer, and Patriots receivers are starting to trust him a lot more. Kayshon Boutte has seen a rise in his play. Demario Douglas as well. And so this could project to be a tougher matchup than people might think. However, going forward, I do know this Bears defense is not scared of anyone anymore. This is a Bears defense, especially in the secondary, that can really hone in on finding that identity for this defense that, should they potentially be a playoff team, will be scary to think about come January, potentially February. So look for the Bears to be one of those defenses that, yes, in certain matchups are a shoe in a start, much like this one, but against better teams, have confidence that they can go in there and shut them down. Because this is a unit, much like the Rams, that's starting to coalesce from back to front. And that's why I like them a lot, even though this matchup certainly feels like chalk in this situation. And then the final defense I want to talk about is perhaps the most popular defense to kind of choose from a fantasy perspective. They'll always be there for you, and this is a matchup, that as well has gotten a little bit tougher than I expected it would, considering what the Bucs brought to the table against the Chiefs. But the 49ers defense going up against the Bucs, this could prove to be a statement game. this is an either-or game as well for the San Francisco 49ers. Either this is the game where they look the most impressive all season, or this is the one where they falter and prove that perhaps there are deeper, more underlying issues that you can't necessarily account for. And so, this is why I feel like the 49ers are such a tough defense to gauge if you really look past the fact that they've been a model of consistency in fantasy for the past couple of years. It feels certainly very different this season on the defensive side of the football for San Fran. And yes, a lot of people were low on the Bucs and might continue to be considering where they are, but you can't underestimate them. And you can't ignore the fact that they put up a fight against the Chiefs, were leading that game because of the NFL's overtime rules, didn't necessarily get a chance to prove that they can beat elite teams without top players. And so the 49ers are going to have to eschew memories of the first half of the season from their minds if they want to move forward. Because the defense kind of did this to themselves. There were a lot of injuries to start, but they have been the healthier unit by far than what the offense has. So, if they look inept in this game, I think this is more of a systemic thing than anything to do with, say, injuries or play style. Because the Bucs are a tougher test than I think a lot of people thought they would be. So, if the 49ers think so too, that's bad news. But I have faith that this defense is going to be better than the sum of its parts this stretch run this season for them. Because I feel like they're going to buck up. This defense is too talented not to, and I can't say that, they're going to continue their struggles on that end of the football. So, those are my 4 defenses for my weekly positional rankings. That will conclude my weekly positional rankings. Coming up in the last segment of today's show, we're going to be doing my weekly shadow report, the key wide receiver quarterback matchups that I believe will define the weekend in fantasy football. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to conclude today's show.